Alright, so in this part of the tutorial, we're going to make it so that our sphere can move around in our game area without leaving the boundaries. So there's several things we have to add. One thing is for everything we have in here, the ground, the player, and all the walls, we have to give them something called a rigid body. We have to give them something called a collision. So I've selected them all on the left side, and I'm going to give them a component called a rigid body. And I'm also give them a component called a collision. Now you'll notice that it'll say something after you add a collision called ammo module not found. Go ahead and click import ammo, and that should make a new folder. That has nothing to do with weapons. It has to do with physics. Essentially, no physics will happen until you have the ammo library imported, which I don't know why it's not in by default, but it is what it is. All right, now we're going to have to go through and change some of our settings. So I'm going to click on the ground by itself, and you can see that it's got a collision right now that has its half extents of 0.5, 0.5 is 0.5. What that means is from its center, it's only going to go 0.5 away to say where its boundary is, which is not the boundary of the plane. And you can see this little box here that represents its collision area. So these numbers here should just be half of the scale size. So instead of 0.5, this should be 10. Instead of 1, 0.5 is right. Instead of 20, this should be 10. And that'll now make the collision area span the entire plane. For the rigid body, you don't have to change anything for the ground. For the player, kind of the same thing we have to look at. Its half extents are all going to be right, but its type is a box, but we want it to be a sphere instead, right? Because our shape is a sphere. The other thing to change is for a rigid body, its type shouldn't be static. It should be dynamic because our sphere is going to be moving. For the walls, we'll have to do them one at a time. For the right wall, which is right here, we are going to need to change for its collision, its half extents, and the x should be 0.5. That's fine. Its y, though, should be 1 because we said its scale was 2, and its z should be 10. I don't know why PlayCanvas can't figure this out on its own, but apparently it can't. And it can stay as static. So now you just have to go through all the rest of them. So we just take half of the scale size, so 10, 1, 0.5. For this one, it should be 10 for the z, and 1 for the y. And for this one, 10 for the x, and 1 for the y. And I think I've got all of them now. One other thing just to kind of clear things up, if I click on root and then add just a blank entity, I could name this walls, and then I could move all the walls inside of it. That's a nice way to just kind of group everything together. All right, so at this point, if I run it, we won't see anything different. Right, we just got our ball here. It's floating, which is interesting. It's for some reason above the plane, so we should look into fixing that. Let me see. So if I look at the plane, I don't think I want that to be 0, but I'm going to change it to be 0. So, oh, that's right. Because a plane doesn't have a thickness, I wanted its y scale to be 0. Oops. All right, so if I run it again, the sphere should no longer be floating. Yep, it's sitting on top of it, but it still can't move. So the last thing we'll do in this, actually this is a good part to stop. So we just added all the colliders. In the next video, I'll show you how to add a script to actually make the sphere move.